45% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency without going into debt. Think about that for a moment. One unexpected car repair, one medical bill that arrives at the wrong time, one broken appliance in the middle of the month. For nearly half the country, any of these small events can instantly turn into financial stress. Now imagine two people living in the same city, earning similar salaries, working similar jobs. One of them panics when something goes wrong. The other barely flinches. Their income is similar. Their lifestyle looks almost identical from the outside. But one quiet difference between them changes every financial decision they make. And that difference is cash. My name is Ted. I'm not a financial expert. I just want to walk through a few examples that reveal how money quietly shapes the decisions we make. Let's go back to that number from the beginning. 45% of Americans cannot cover a $1,000 emergency without borrowing money or going into debt. That statistic comes from recent Federal Reserve data, and it reveals something deeper than most people initially notice. Because this is not simply about budgeting mistakes or poor discipline. What it really shows is how financially fragile many households have quietly become. For decades, the standard financial advice has sounded very straightforward. Build an emergency fund. Save 3 to 6 months of expenses. Keep a financial buffer for unexpected situations. The idea is simple. Life is unpredictable, so you prepare for the unexpected. But when researchers looked at the actual numbers, the reality turned out to be far more uncomfortable. Only about 55% of American adults have set aside enough savings to cover 3 months of expenses. That means nearly half of the population does not have even a short-term financial cushion, and roughly 30% of adults say they could not cover 3 months of expenses by any means. Not by selling assets, not by borrowing from family, and not even by tapping retirement accounts. In other words, millions of people are living with almost no margin for financial error. To understand why this matters, imagine two people living in the same city. Daniel Brooks works in logistics in Denver. Melissa Carter works in marketing for an online retail company. Their incomes are similar, and their monthly expenses are also similar, around $5,000 a month. From the outside, their lives appear almost identical. They rent similar apartments. They drive similar cars. Their daily routines look the same. But there is one quiet difference between them. Daniel lives paycheck to paycheck. Melissa has built a 6-month cash cushion. When financial pressure appears, that single difference changes everything. Daniel's financial life is fragile. Melissa's is resilient. And the difference between the two begins with one simple concept: liquidity. The first power of having cash is something most people never think about. It changes how clearly you can think. Researchers at Princeton and Harvard studied what happens to the human brain when people experience financial scarcity. Their findings were published in a well-known study called Scarcity: Why Having Too Little Means So Much. What they discovered was surprising. Financial stress does not only create worry, it also reduces cognitive capacity. In simple terms, when your brain is constantly occupied with money problems, you have less mental bandwidth available for everything else. Imagine Daniel Brooks again. His monthly expenses are around $5,000. His paycheck covers those expenses, but barely. When his car suddenly needs a $1,000 repair, the situation immediately becomes stressful. Now his mind is racing. Which bill can wait? Should he use a credit card? What happens if another expense appears next week? These questions do not stay in the background. They dominate his attention. The researchers call this effect tunneling. When financial pressure becomes intense, your focus narrows to the most urgent problem in front of you. Everything outside that tunnel becomes harder to see. Long-term thinking begins to disappear. Planning becomes difficult. Even decisions that have nothing to do with money start to suffer because your mental energy is already consumed. Now compare that with Melissa Carter. Her monthly expenses are also around $5,000, but she has built a 6-month cash cushion. That means she has roughly $30,000 set aside in savings. If a $1,000 repair appears in Melissa's life, it is inconvenient, but it is not mentally overwhelming. The expense is covered. Her brain does not enter survival mode. That difference changes how she approaches almost every decision. At work, she can focus on solving problems instead of worrying about the next bill. When negotiating her salary, she can think strategically rather than react emotionally. When considering new opportunities, she has the mental space to evaluate them carefully. The money itself is not what creates this advantage. The real advantage is psychological. Cash removes the constant background noise of financial anxiety, and when that noise disappears, your mind becomes free to think clearly again. The second power of cash is something that rarely gets discussed in traditional financial advice. It changes how much leverage you have when dealing with other people. Think again about Daniel Brooks and Melissa Carter. Both work hard. Both are competent in their jobs. From the outside, they appear to be in similar positions professionally. But when the time comes for an annual review, their financial situations quietly shape the way they negotiate. Daniel lives paycheck to paycheck. His monthly expenses are about $5,000, and most of his income disappears as soon as his bills are paid. That means every paycheck matters immediately. Missing even one could create serious problems. So when his manager presents a small salary increase, Daniel hesitates to push back. Asking for more feels risky. The possibility of conflict feels uncomfortable. The idea of losing the job entirely feels terrifying. From Daniel's perspective, stability is more important than negotiation. Now consider Melissa. Her expenses are also about $5,000 per month, but she has built a 6-month financial cushion. Roughly $30,000 is sitting in her savings account, quietly earning interest in a high-yield savings account. That single difference changes the entire psychology of the conversation. When Melissa sits down for her review, she can negotiate calmly. She can ask questions about market salary ranges. She can request time to consider the offer. If the company refuses to adjust the compensation, she has the ability to explore other opportunities without immediate panic. She does not need to walk away. But the fact that she could changes the balance of power. This matters because the average duration of unemployment in the United States is about 23 weeks, nearly 6 months. That statistic surprises many people. Finding a new job often takes longer than expected. Without savings, that reality becomes frightening. With savings, it becomes manageable. Over time, this difference compounds. Two workers with similar skills can experience very different career outcomes simply because one negotiates with confidence while the other negotiates with fear. Cash quietly shifts that balance. It turns financial conversations from moments of desperation into moments of choice. The third power of cash is something economists sometimes call the poverty premium. It describes a strange and uncomfortable reality. The less money you have available, the more expensive everyday life becomes. At first, this sounds backwards. You would expect people with less money to spend less. But in many situations, the opposite happens. Let's go back to Daniel Brooks. Because Daniel lives paycheck to paycheck, most of his financial decisions are shaped by urgency. When something breaks, he cannot always wait for the best price. He has to solve the problem immediately. If his car suddenly needs repairs, he goes to the closest mechanic rather than comparing options. If his refrigerator stops working, he may have to buy the first replacement he can afford instead of waiting for a sale. Small differences like these add up quickly. Another example appears in everyday purchases. People with limited cash often cannot buy in bulk. Instead of buying larger quantities at lower unit prices, they buy smaller quantities more frequently. Over time, that raises the total cost of basic items. Insurance provides another illustration. Many companies offer discounts if customers pay the entire annual premium upfront. These discounts often range between 5 and 15%, but paying the full year requires cash available today. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, that option rarely exists, so they pay the higher monthly rate instead. Maintenance creates a similar pattern. Preventive repairs are usually cheaper than emergency repairs. Replacing worn tires early costs less than dealing with a blowout on the highway. Fixing a small plumbing issue costs far less than repairing water damage after a pipe bursts. But preventive action requires cash at the right moment. Without that flexibility, small problems quietly turn into expensive emergencies. Over time, the effect becomes significant. The poverty premium acts like an invisible tax on financial instability. People with less money are often forced to make decisions based on urgency instead of value. Cash changes that dynamic. When you have liquidity, you gain the ability to slow down. You can compare prices. You can wait for better timing. You can make decisions based on long-term value rather than immediate pressure. And across hundreds of everyday transactions, those small advantages compound. The fourth power of cash is the ability to capture opportunities when they appear. Most opportunities in life do not arrive on a convenient schedule. They appear suddenly, often when you least expect them. And when they do, the people who can move quickly usually benefit the most. Consider the stock market. Markets do not fall slowly and politely. Sometimes they drop quickly and unexpectedly. When that happens, investors with available cash can buy assets at significantly lower prices. Those without liquidity often watch from the sidelines. They may understand that prices are attractive, but understanding alone does not create opportunity. Action requires capital. A similar pattern appears in many areas of life. A small business opportunity might appear through a friend or colleague. The numbers might make sense. The risk might be reasonable. But without available funds, participation becomes impossible. Real estate provides another example. Sometimes a property becomes available below market value because the seller needs to close quickly. Buyers who can move fast may secure a better deal. But speed requires liquidity. The same dynamic appears in careers as well. A new job opportunity may require relocation or a short transition period between paychecks. Without savings, even a positive career move can feel financially dangerous. With a financial cushion, that transition becomes far easier to manage. Over time, the difference between these two situations becomes enormous. One person constantly misses opportunities because they are financially constrained. Another person can evaluate opportunities calmly and decide whether they are worth pursuing. The difference is not intelligence. It is not luck. It is simply the presence of available cash. Cash turns unexpected moments into real options. So if cash creates this much stability, leverage, and opportunity, the obvious question becomes simple. How do you actually build a cash cushion? Financial advice often makes this sound overwhelming. The common recommendation is to save 3 to 6 months of expenses. For someone spending about $5,000 per month, that means building a reserve between $15,000 and $30,000. At first glance, that number can feel intimidating. But the key is to think about the process in stages, rather than trying to reach the final number all at once. The first stage is simply stopping the financial bleeding. For many households, the most important initial step is building a small emergency buffer of around $1,000 to $2,000. This amount is not meant to solve every problem. Its purpose is to prevent everyday disruptions from immediately turning into credit card debt. A car repair, a medical copay, or a broken appliance becomes manageable rather than catastrophic. Once that first layer exists, the second stage is building a real buffer. This usually means reaching 3 months of expenses. Using our earlier example, that would be about $15,000 for someone spending roughly $5,000 per month. The most effective way to reach this level is consistency rather than intensity. Automating the process helps remove the emotional struggle from saving. A recurring transfer that moves money from checking to savings each month slowly builds momentum. Saving $200 per month becomes about $2,400 in a year. Saving $500 per month grows to roughly $6,000 annually. Over time, these steady contributions begin to compound into meaningful protection. The third stage is reaching genuine financial breathing room. 6 months of expenses provides a level of flexibility that changes how many people experience financial decisions. In our example, that would mean building a reserve close to $30,000. Where you store this money also matters. Many people now use high-yield savings accounts, which currently offer around 4% to 5% annual interest. That is more than 10 times the national average savings rate of about 0.39%. If $20,000 sits in a high-yield account, earning roughly 4% interest, it can generate about $800 in interest each year while remaining fully accessible. That balance can still be withdrawn when needed, but it quietly grows while waiting. It is also helpful to place this money somewhere slightly separate from everyday spending. A savings account at a different bank without a debit card attached can create just enough friction to discourage impulsive withdrawals. When you need the money, it is available, but accessing it requires a small pause, and that pause protects the cushion. The goal is not perfection. The goal is simply building enough financial space that unexpected events no longer control your decisions.